The literary critic, Émile Zola, once said this about a certain writer. His works may make people laugh or cry, but they always stimulate thought. Une Vie by the great master of the short story and towering realist critic Guy de Maupassant is such a work. Jean, the heroine of the novel, is born with a silver spoon in her mouth. She seems to possess all the conditions for a fulfilled and happy life. Her family is very wealthy, and she herself is kind, gentle, and never vain. And yet in the end, this character meets a sorrowful fate. What was it that made such a person unable to live happily? After reading this book, you will understand that it is not that life has never favored us at all, but that each of us has, like Jean, given up our own chance to choose happiness again and again. And that is also because we fail to hold on to the lowest boundary within ourselves. Hi everyone, welcome to XYZ Library, a channel that shares knowledge and encourages holistic self-development through good books. Today, I would like to share with you a reflection entitled, "Why are there people who, no matter how they live, can never be happy?" Through the famous novel Une Vie by Guy de Maupassant. Please listen along. A person cannot be happy because he fails to keep hold of his own lowest boundary. In the eyes of others, Jean is an extraordinarily fortunate girl. She is born the only child of a wealthy aristocratic family and has been cherished by her parents since childhood. Before her marriage, her parents decide to leave her the most famous estate in the family line. Jean grows up in such ease and leisure. By the time she is 17, the young girl already knows love and is full of dreamy fantasies about the prince of her life. Someone introduces to her a young nobleman named Julien, tall, handsome, and elegant. Jean falls in love with him at first sight, and this young man immediately devises a romantic plan of proposal. Everything arrives just as she hoped. They quickly marry, and Jean feels herself to be the luckiest girl in the world. Yet, not long afterward, like a villain stepping onto the stage, he changes his face with startling speed. Taking advantage of his wife's innocence, Julien seizes control of her estate. Once all financial power is in his hands, Jean becomes worthless to him. He shows her no respect at all, lives selfishly, and is terribly miserly. Whenever anything displeases him, he immediately becomes irritable, cold, and no longer retains the dignity of a nobleman that he had once displayed. One day, he beats a servant for no reason, and harshly accuses Jean's parents of not knowing how to manage their own servants. Her parents are so angry that they move out that very night. A great educational theorist once warned people, "If you marry in haste, you must be ready to accept the risk of becoming one of the unfortunate." A hasty marriage is like a house with a weak foundation. However splendid it may look on the outside, once you actually begin living in it, you realize that it may collapse at any moment. And the greatest danger in Jean's life is that she does not understand this. To like someone may begin with appearance, admiration of talent, similarity of temperament and habits, but in the end everything depends on character. You will see that the foundation of any relationship always depends on a person's character. There is a famous line that says, "If you want a lasting relationship with someone, in the end, it must rest on the lowest boundary of that person's character." What does this mean? Simply that before we enter deeply into any relationship, whether love or friendship, we must draw for ourselves the lowest line of character we can accept in the other person. That boundary is like a line of principle inside us. There are things that, if they do not cross that line, we may learn to be tolerant of and allow the other person a chance to grow, while giving the relationship a chance to be built and maintained. But there are also things that, once they cross that line, such as dishonesty, arrogance, violence, or selfish opportunism in the other person. You must know how to stop immediately. There is a saying, "The root of all human suffering comes from a lack of awareness of boundaries." If you lower your principles too easily and allow the other person to cross over, to step past the lowest boundary within you, then, in the end, the one who gets hurt can only be yourself. Just like Jean's family, who saw Julien's true face clearly and yet still chose to let everything pass. And Jean herself only swallowed her anger inwardly, each time comforting herself. Be calm, endure it, forget it. And then, in the end, Jean discovers that Julien has long been having an affair with the servant Rosalie. Only then does she finally break down and want to cut ties with this vile and unfaithful husband. Yet once again, the firmness she needs to preserve the lowest boundary within herself is shaken. Her father advises her that because she is already pregnant, she should let everything pass. And in this way, Julien is accepted back again. Schopenhauer once said, "Fortune and misfortune both have their reasons. Happiness and suffering are not merely arrangements of fate. They also arise from the principles and attitudes by which we choose to live. Those who cannot be happy are those who from the very beginning have abandoned their own principles of living. Tolerance without limits is a disaster." Not long afterward, when Jean's son Paul is born, Julien is pushed off a cliff by a count because of an affair with the count's wife and dies. After Julien's death, Jean pours all her love and indulgence into her son. She spoils him and gives in to him in everything. Paul is lazy about studying, only begins school at 10, and yet by 20 still cannot graduate. He skips classes regularly, gambles, and is caught in a brothel in a miserable condition. And yet Jean still indulges him, even buying him a boat so that he can go to sea and relax. I once heard a saying like this: "Tolerance without limits is a human crime." In this life, we need to know how to be tolerant, but once there is no stopping point, it becomes nothing more than a signal to the other person. Go ahead, be even more excessive. Jean's overprotectiveness makes her son slide deeper and deeper into the abyss, dragging the whole family line into ruin. And the moment Paul is out of Jean's sight, he immediately runs off with a woman to London. After that, he sends letters home threatening suicide if money is not sent to him. At first it is a few thousand, then hundreds of thousands, and finally, Jean must even mortgage the villa itself. Jean's father dies of rage over this. She is forced to leave the estate where she grew up, move into a small house in the village, and live like an ordinary peasant woman. Rather than saying that the whole family was destroyed by the wayward son Paul, it would be truer to say that everything was destroyed by Jean's limitless tolerance. If you are tolerant and indulgent towards selfishness, greed, cunning, and cruelty, then your generosity is no different from pushing the other person deeper into the pit. Trip Rain once said, "A person has two hearts, one heart full of blood, and one heart that must know how to forgive. But we must understand that forgiveness must have limits. Otherwise we will only wound ourselves without end. Happiness does not belong to those who refuse to grow up." Jean misses her son so desperately that she goes to London alone. But after leaving home, she suddenly realizes that she is completely lost in this city. She does not know how to book a hotel, does not dare ask for directions, and is bewildered by strangers. She cannot find her son, and eventually returns to the village in disappointment. From then on, Jean shuts herself up at home and speaks to no one. Every morning, she stands at the window blankly gazing at the sky, then goes downstairs and sits beside the fire all day long. From beginning to end in her life, Jean refuses the call to grow up. Looking back, Fate had actually treated Jean quite well. Even when she had fallen into the abyss, she still had 3 chances to change, to save herself. And yet, she refused all of them. The first time was after returning from her honeymoon, when she saw clearly the true face of her deceitful husband. At that moment, she ought to have rightfully reclaimed her property and driven him out of the house, but instead she chose blind endurance. The second time was after her husband's death. She had at last been freed from a miserable marriage. Then she could have started a new life. But instead of striving to improve herself and become an example for her son, Jean once again placed all her emotional dependence on the boy. And the third time, when her son had become corrupted, despite all the warnings that she should not shield him too much, she continued to indulge him, and in the end the whole family was destroyed. Are there many people in this world as extremely weak as Jean? In truth, when you look around, they are everywhere, and we ourselves also carry Jean's shadow within us. Think back to a moment in your own life. How many times have you known something was wrong, and yet kept making the same mistake? How many times have you ignored your own boundaries, lived without principles, and continued to tolerate and love someone recklessly? How many times have you placed your own joy, your expectations, and your hopes too heavily on another person? How many times have you lacked the courage to let go, to stop at the right moment? And how many times have you failed to change, rejected the growth that life's lessons were trying to remind you of and offer you again and again? Everyone has suffering to overcome, but the greatest opponent is not the ups and downs of fate, it is oneself. If a person does not want to change, then no matter how many people help him, no matter how much money he has, no matter how many opportunities crowd around him, he can only keep taking detours, wandering in the maze of life, and end in suffering. The psychiatrist, author of The Road Less Traveled, also tells us, people may refuse many things, but they must never refuse to grow up. To refuse change is, in truth, to avoid the problem and run away from pain. In life, many of us are always trying to avoid certain things. We make mistakes and do not dare to bear them. We do not dare to face our losses and our own problems directly. All these things are the roots of why we cannot be happy. Suffering itself is not what is truly frightening. Refusing to grow up, that is what makes suffering unbearable. May both you and I have enough wisdom to hold happiness in our own hands. Thank you for listening. If you found this video helpful, please share it with those who need it. Do not forget to support me by liking, subscribing, and turning on the notification bell so you can catch my latest weekly videos. Once again, thank you for listening. XYZ Library is always here, accompanying you as you grow each day.